Good morning. Good morning. Dab of Delight will uplift you. Stay tuned. The show is about to begin. Grab your coffee. Stay tuned. This show is about to begin.
Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
Well, this is going to be an interesting show with the camera that I'm using is kind of like really goofing up a little bit here. Hopefully it doesn't fall off, and and you're in the dark and I'm in the light. And
I'm telling you, let me just switch on some lights in this place. Give me 2 seconds. Wait, because it's very dark in here. That it's suddenly overcast, and the wind is blowing like crazy. I thought I will be able to go sit on the containers and enjoy the full moon tonight, but the wind will blow you right off it.
Good morning, Sherry. Hope you're doing well today. Hope you had a phenomenal weekend. I know I did, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as time comes up here. And I just realized that I'm using a speaker or a microphone that may not be the best. Can you hear me all right, Ilse?
I can hear you. Awesome.
Okay, well, I'm not going to screw around with what I got if you can hear me.
So
I'm speaking on my microphone here, and then I realize I haven't plugged it into my computer. I'm like, what?
I'm telling you, with this full moon, everything is going. Just go with it. Just flow.
Yeah, exactly. I look like Casper the Friendly Ghost, and that's just the way it's going to have to be for now.
You're the little light in people's lives today.
Yeah, so
you spent it with Mr. Bob.
Yes. Well, first let's just kind of let everybody know, Brandon's still not feeling too well. So he's not going to be on the show today. I think he may even be going to the doctor again today before trying to hit the road and head back from Texas back up to Ohio. So luckily I woke up early enough here, and it's actually a lot nicer here in Chicago. It's like 2 hours later. So instead of 7 o'clock in the morning, it is 9 o'clock in the morning here, which was a lot nicer for me in terms of having to wake up. I didn't have to wake up so early.
I thought this morning I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do yoga, I'm going to meditate. It's the full moon. 8:30, the guy that came to look at my car phoned me awake. I'm like, what? I'm still sleeping. What is up? And then I realized it's Monday. I was so all over the show this morning. So I eventually got to my meditation and to my yoga, but only like an hour ago.
Oh my gosh.
Over the show, I had some drama, and I don't know, the energies are just screwing the people around. People are just, I don't know what's going on with life and people in general.
Well, that's kind of the thing. It's kind of interesting. You're coming more toward the end of the business day, right? You're about what, 5 o'clock your time?
We're exactly 4 o'clock now.
4 o'clock. So you've kind of been through the majority of your active day, let's put it that way. So you get a chance to kind of talk about the news and what's going on there, or what has gone on there so far today. And we're just kind of getting started. And I know earlier today you were talking about that people are starting to march there? What are they marching about?
The COVID vaccine, because people are being forced to take the vaccine, not directly forced, but indirectly. And I'm sorry, all my things keep falling off my desk.
That's okay. I got a feeling that's going to be me too.
They're starting to march. At the beginning, it was well, it's still a peaceful march. I don't think there was any issues and stuff. But I just want to say to our fellow, I don't want to say South Africans, and I can't say Americans, because our fellow humans, when South Africa starts marching about something and they do not get their way, they start burning down the place. So we got you. We are taking this to extreme measures, because that's where it will be taken. Because when the people believe that they are protesting for something that is very important to their livelihood, be it an increase in we actually have a strike season that they call strike season in South Africa, where they start making turns in different industries to strike. You get the steel industry strike first, then it's the transport strike. And once these guys start striking, what they do is they will burn down, break everything, where they give the vaccinations. I mean, if they've got a transport strike, they don't let any other trucks drive. They set them alight. They don't care. They don't care. Protests in South Africa can be very, very violent. Very violent. So people are starting to protest because of the COVID vaccine. So I think, my personal opinion, I think that people are starting to get very, very serious about not taking this vaccine. A lot of them.
Yeah, well, I think, we're seeing some of that. If I'm not mistaken, they had some demonstrations in France, and they had some demonstrations in Canada and things along those lines, where people are really starting to take more action about the controls that the governments are trying to put on the forcing of the vaccinations. I think there's more information that people are starting to get, that the vaccinations are maybe not what they were presented.
They say it is. Yes.
And even though you've got organizations like the FDA, Food and Drug Administration here. Good morning, Lena. Nice to see you.
Hi,
Lena. They're recognizing that. So the FDA here just basically said the booster is not approved for people between any younger than, let's call it younger than 65. It's not approved, the booster. The booster is approved for the older people, 65 and older, which was kind of, the high risk group, the one that had all the, deaths early on. I think that's going to end up being backfiring based on the information, the studying that I've done on how the boosters are going to impact the body, and especially impact the body with regard to how the body's going to respond to the flu season this year. So we may see another resurgence, heavy resurgence of troubled information and deaths coming from the geriatric community, the older community, because they are being told to get the booster, and they are going to have the challenges with the way that the vaccine is affecting their response to the flu, which this year I truly believe everybody's going to be dying from the flu. Nobody's going to die from the virus, because everybody had to get the vaccine, so now they got to blame something else.
Exactly. So now flu will come back. What do you think will happen in America now with the winter that's coming?
Well, I think that's where we're really going to start to see this, because normal flu season starts toward the end of October and runs to March timeframe. That has traditionally been the flu season, but that's also been the time when people, the medical industry has actually been reporting it. They don't normally report flu stuff prior to October and after March, even though it may be occurring. They're just not reporting it the same way as it was before. And, you know, they've got to be able to gear up so that they can get people to take the flu vaccination at the same time. So that's a whole new thing, is what's going to happen when you get the flu vaccine on top of the booster or on top of the COVID vaccine. So really going to be an interesting time, because this is really last year they had the flu vaccine, but we didn't have the COVID vaccine during flu season really last year. So this will be the first year that all that's coming together.
Yeah, I've got this feeling that they had this plan and they just thought that everybody was going to go along with it. I don't think that the governments or anybody expected people to actually stand up for themselves and say they will not take it. I don't think they were prepared for that. Just my personal opinion. Maybe they were and they don't give a crap, but I don't think they thought that there would be so many people against the vaccine.
Well, you know, I agree. I think that what's happened is all those that follow without really thinking have already done the vaccine. Those that were on the fence have kind of decided which side of the fence they're going to be on. So now if you're on the fence, if you're on the side of the vaccine, you already had it. If you are on the side of not getting it, you're not. And those are the ones that this whole forcible aspect of, you know, different ways of coercion to be able to get people to get the vaccine. And I agree 100% with Sherry in that, you know, we need to be focusing on the immune system as much as possible. And interestingly enough, I went to college in the middle of Illinois called Illinois Wesleyan, and they got a good bio pre-med and nursing program. And back around March of 2020 or April of 2020, they had a discussion about, actually it was, yeah, I'm trying to remember years. This is 2021. So yeah, 2020. They had a group of doctors and nurses come together, and they were talking about the COVID situation and so forth. And I was able to get a comment in or a question. And I said, why is it that we're not seeing naturopaths up on the TV along with these, you know, Dr. Fauci and those guys, and giving a different perspective? And why is it that we're not emphasizing improving your immunity, your natural immunity, your immune system? How do you do that? By, you know, taking zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C, those types of things.
Eating healthy.
Eating healthy. And their response was, we don't have time for that right now. The virus is is moving so fast. We have to focus on, you know, how we're going to treat it or how we're going to give vaccinations. And here we are 18 months later, and you still don't see Jack on TV about how do you improve your immune system? How do you deal with things without having to focus on the vaccine and the treatment? And nothing. I mean, crickets. Why? Because that would take away from the fear when people started to realize they actually can control their body's response to the virus by improving our own immune systems. And that's crazy that you know, we have that kind of influence as Sherry's saying, you know, big pharma and big government have had to justify their value by continuing this narrative, and anybody or anything that could potentially take away from it is suppressed. And the most natural things, the things that your doctors would normally be telling you to do, are those things that they're not emphasizing on TV. You know, your doctors prior to COVID again would be saying, do the things that are going to be helpful to your immune system. Get a good night's rest. Make sure you eat well. Make sure you take some vitamins. Do those types of things. And no, they're not saying damn thing about that stuff, because it's going to take away from the fear base that's they're still trying to use to get people and coerce people into taking the vaccine. And here, just like you were saying, it sounds like in South Africa now, if you don't get the vaccine and then you do get the virus, they're going to take away your health benefits. You're not going to get your
sick leave. They're forcing the people to they say if you do not take the vaccine and you get COVID, you get unpaid leave. They will not use your sick leave, which is annual leave that you get over 3 years, a certain amount of days. They will not use that. They won't take your sick leave. They'll take your annual leave. And if you don't have annual leave, they will not pay you.
Yeah. And we've got similar type things happening here where, you know, they're like, if you don't get the vaccine, you're going to get charged an extra $200 a month for health insurance and stuff like that. It's stupid crazy. And, you know, I don't necessarily like that we continue to have to talk about this kind of stuff, because quite frankly, you know, these discussions are not usually that good for people's immune system, because it creates in a lot of people an uncertainty. Now, you know, you're trying to bring up things that are contrary to the narrative, but are supported by science, supported by well-known virologists and immunologists, but it's going contrary. So one of the biggest things for people's immune system is having congruity and having certainty in their life, because everybody needs a level of certainty in their life, and it can be in different areas of their life, but they need to have certainty. And then there's certain things that people have looked at as being the foundation of their belief system, the foundation of, you know, the government doing the right thing for the people, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Center for Disease Control are out there to really do everything they possibly can to help people, but they're starting to see and hear things that are legitimately supported. They're not conspiracy theory things, and it's causing people now to have more uncertainty. And the other thing that it is it's scaring people. I think it's going to, even over the course of the next 6-8 months here, through the flu season and so forth, and the boosters, and when we see the reality of what's happening, like in Israel, where Israel is one of the most highest percentage of double vaccinated, you know, people in the world, and yet over 50% of those that are in their hospitals in intensive care units are those that have double vaccination.
So I say we have to play it, see what to play it out, stay with. If you do not want to take it, if you want to take it, just do your research.
I think it's
if you want to take it, don't let anybody force you to take it. That's just if you want to take it, but don't let anybody take your human rights away to make a decision.
Well, what's interesting, I noticed on I was looking out on a website, and there was actually now starting to be like job searches for companies that are not requiring the vaccine. So if you don't want to get the vaccine, then you can go to this site to try to find a job when you're going to lose your job if you don't get the vaccine. In other industries, they're like, you can go here and try to find a job where you don't have to get the vaccine. And I think that that's fantastic.
I also like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Tell us
you
now
know,
more. Let's just not talk about COVID.
Yeah.
I get so depressed on a Monday. What's his name? Tell us a little bit more about Miss Carly and what you guys did with Uncle Bob.
Yeah. Well, this weekend has been a real interesting weekend. I wasn't planning on being in Chicago, but the day before my 41st high school reunion, I took a look out on the web to see what kind of flights were out here, and literally the day before flying out here, I could get a ticket for like $128 round trip from Vegas to here. And that's a really good price when you've got a 3-week notice, and this is a 1-day notice. So I jumped on that. I came here, and my girlfriend lives here, so that was awesome. And my girlfriend and I met in our 35th high school reunion, which was the last one. So we became the scandal because here we are, 2 people that nobody knew were dating each other since the last reunion. And it was like the scandal of the class because we were dating and we didn't know each other in high school. And then some of the girls that organized the reunion, they're like, we're going to take credit for this because we got Marie to come to the reunion, the last reunion. She wasn't going to come, but we convinced her to come, and that's where you guys met. So anyhow, that was really cool. We also got a chance to see an amazing, I did not realize that where I grew up, Waukegan, Illinois, I knew we had a marina there, but it's always, in my mind, it's always been kind of the way it used to be, which is not really great. But we went to a part of the marina that was absolutely gorgeous. And the night skies, I forgot to bring some pictures. I'll have to put some pictures out there. We had a moon that was reflecting off of the water with the boats in the marina. It was absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, Jaybird reunion.
Mr. Jaybird is already making money out of you, yeah? Start that app.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the first day, or Friday last week, and then Saturday, Bob Seymour was in Rockford, Illinois, which is about an hour and a half drive from where my girlfriend lives, where I'm at. And I was like, crap, if we're within that close a distance to Bob, we're going. And Bob was the MC for a charity funds drive that motorcycle clubs put on so that they could get more money for this charity. And it was, the charity is called Miss Carly's. What it is it's a program and kind of a home where a woman who got herself out of prostitution and drug abuse and all that has put together a program to help others. So she can stand toe to toe with anybody that comes to the door and says they need help. And when they start to give her bullshit, she's like, no, that ain't what you need. This is what you need. I got a 90-day program here. If you follow this program, we're going to put a roof over your head. We're going to give you the food. We're going to give you the support that you need. We need your commitment. If you prove that you really want to make a change, then you can stay in our program. And when you get done with this 90-day program, we're going to help you to get a job. We're going to help you to find a place that is a permanent roof over your head. We're going to help you to do all those things. Just absolutely amazing woman and program that she put together. But she like feeds 800 people or 800 meals a day for the community there that is tied to her her support, which is like over $1,400 in food per day that she's got to come up with money for. So it's it's not a cheap program, even though she's trying to do it on a budget. But when you've got 400, 800 people that are there basically going through your program, she needs money. So the motorcycle, there were like, I think over 36, 40 motorcycles and some cars and stuff, and each one paid a certain amount. And then they came back to this bar where Marie and I were there, and Bob comes walking through the door, and it was just amazing to see Bob. First thing was Bob came through the door, and I'm about to say hi, and I'm like, no, that's a man with a mission. He's got to go to the bathroom. And boom. It's off to the bathroom, because part of this was they called it a poker run. So they were going from like one bar to another, like 2 or 3, 4 bars, whatever, before coming back. And I was like, okay, well, I'll let him take care of that, because he is definitely a man with a mission. Then he comes out, and it was a great reunion, because Marie and I met Bob for the first time just out in South Dakota back in July. So it was only the second time we got a chance to meet him. Met up with some of Bob's friends. It was an amazing night. We're gonna name the show on Friday, Holy Cow, I'm Fucked Up. Because that was
that's a deal. That's a deal.
that was the comment I remembered most from Bob that night. He was tipping them back pretty well, and people were buying them drinks and all that kind of stuff. And he's like standing there holding on to this pole as he's like, woo. And I wanted to stand behind him just in case he like missed the pole and he was gonna go backwards. So when he said, "Ooh, holy cow, I'm fucked up," I was like,
that is so awesome. That is so awesome.
Yeah, it was great, because what happened is they came in on their bikes, and then Bob and one of his friends were like, "Hey, Brett, you've got the car. Would you mind if you escorted us back so we can drop our bikes off where we're going to stay, and then give us a ride back here so that we can have a few?" And that was kind of the beginning of the evening. Now, the entertainment, holy crap, these are like musicians. They played the blues, and they used to be a part of some of the greatest jazz musicians in the Chicago area, if not in the country, before. And now they came together, and they were here to support it. And Bob was in seventh heaven, being able to watch these guys. And then even more so, he got up on stage just to put his arm around the guys. Now, Bob might have needed to hold his arm around him to stand up there, but he was having a blast being able to be with legends that you could just see the light in Bob's face all night long. He was just absolutely having a great time, and a big part of that was supporting Miss Carly, having an opportunity to listen to these jazz legends as they're playing, and then recognizing that Crown on the Rocks is Crown Royal whiskey on the rocks was flowing really good and just kind of going down real nice and easy.
It's all fun and games until somebody needs a pole to lean against.
Oh.
Or a blues player.
Well, luckily, Bob had a lot of friends there, so everybody was keeping an eye on him, making sure he was going to be fine. Latter part of the evening, Bob's like, "Oh, I'm starting to feel hungry," and Bob's funny. He's up there and he's going to order a drink, right? And then he pulls out his wallet and he's looking in there. And I'm like, "Don't worry, your money's no good here." He's like, "That's good, because I got none."
I just love Uncle Bob to bits. I just love Uncle Bob to bits.
Yeah, it was so funny. Then he's like, I'm starting to feel hungry. I'm like, Bob, what do you want to eat? Get something to eat. And he got something to eat, and I paid for it. And again, he's trying to look through his wallet where he's got no money to begin with. Bob is like, like that pretty women at the bar. You can go there without any money, and you can still get drunk and have a whole lot of fun.
That's a very good party trick to have, is to just stand at a bar and get drinks all over and everything. What I wanted to say is that I don't think people think or people know how hard Miss Carly must work, or how hard Miss Carly is working to help these people in these situations, because it's the people that got thrown away and feel that they have nobody, and to pick somebody up spiritually like that is hard work. It's hard work. She's a real angel, and she'll be blessed. She'll be blessed for all the work that she does for these individuals.
Well, and what's even more interesting, and this kind of goes back to our previous discussion, which we won't really go back to, but she's running a very successful program, one where, there's 60% or more, maybe it's even a lot higher success rate in helping people that make it through the program. And the government has been trying to shut her down.
Seriously?
Why? Yeah. The government doesn't like it, because here's this nonprofit organization that is not under the government's rule of thumb, that is doing a much better job than the government supported programs that are supposed to be there for people with, addictions or those types of things. So rather than trying to support and learn from Miss Carly, they're trying to shut her down.
Yeah, because they don't have the compassion, or they don't want to. Because if the government wanted to help individuals that are in this position, they wouldn't do the things to Miss Carly that they're busy doing, and they will pull their fingers from their asses and help and say, what can we do? What can we do to help you and to relieve this? Because there's a lot of people, a lot of people that are affected by this, even if it's not them using the drugs, but their direct family and everything. I mean, it's a huge thing going through that.
Well, and it's just, it shows that, these government agencies most often fail or don't have the level of success that you can have if you get it out of the government's hands. Governments in general tend to be very inefficient in doing what they are using our tax dollars to do. And when somebody comes up with a program that actually is proving itself to be effective, that threatens the budget for those government programs, because they're based on the perception that they're really working. But if you can show that these other organizations that are not governmental are doing a much better job, how is it that you're justifying your budget? And how is it that you're justifying that you want more money for your budget? Because, I was in the military and at the Pentagon for 9 years in the reserves. And one of the biggest things was, how do you not get your budget cut? So if you become more efficient and you don't need to use all your money, at the end of the year, you have to go and spend it, because if you don't use all your money, you won't get your allocation next year. So it's really, and I think this is across any government, any country, once you start to justify your existence, the way that you continue to justify your existence is to grow your budget, not to cut it back.
Exactly.
And when you talk about the leaders of those departments or organizations and things, their pay scale is oftentimes based on the budget that they preside over. And you know, that becomes a real I call it self-defeating prophecy, right? You know, if what it is how much money you can spend, I'm going to figure out how to spend more.
Exactly. Hi, morning, guys. Morning, Jane and Mandy and Jessica. Hope you guys have a wonderful Monday.
Good
It's
morning.
mental health
Good
today.
morning.
What did you do to save your mental health today?
Yeah, it's you know, mental health. Again, that's another one of those things where you don't see enough stuff on TV. That, you know, what would be awesome is just like the Java Delight. What if every morning they had just a 15-second advertisement about a happy idea, or how to you know, create a happier time? And you know, it's a 15-second, but if it was every day, people would be exposed to it, and then they might start their day on a different in a different mindset than they woke up with, and that would be amazing. But we don't see that. Why?
Because it doesn't benefit them. It doesn't benefit them because antidepressant sales will go down. All pharmaceuticals will go down if they give people a natural way to heal themselves mentally, to sort this. I actually did some research, and they say 6 keys to mental health is social connection, staying active, managing stress, brain healthy diet, quality sleep, and meaning and purpose.
Absolutely. You know, all those things are some of the topics that we try to address here, so that we give people better tools in their toolkit, and yet you don't see really any kind of concerted effort to bring that out to the general public via mass media, via the government. No, and that's quite a challenge. And you know, I as Jess is saying, ultimately people have to choose, though that's where the issue comes in. People like the idea of joy and happiness, but they do not want to do the work to achieve it. True.
That is true. That is true. You need to want to make the change.
Right. And you know, the encouragement helps. If they were to see that kind of encouragement, like we do here on Java Delight, to bring things out, if we could do that same kind of thing, if the governments were to use their damn budget to do that, as opposed to fund research on new drugs to deal with things, we would have a much healthier society today. One that can cope with the challenges that we are experiencing today.
True. Even if they start in schools, I mean, if they start in schools, start with a younger generation, because a lot of the younger generation's mental health issues come from their parents who have mental health issues and can't even help themselves.
Right.
So I mean, if they equip children in school with some kind of how do you say, structure on how to pick up, even if your parents, how to pick up your parents are depressed, because how many kids don't even know that their moms are going through stuff, because as moms or as parents, we hide it. We hide our feelings, we hide our problems, and that just escalates. So I feel that if they do this in school, and they start in school already, and setting up the kids on how to look after your mental health and how to do this and how to do that, it will already start making that ripple effect into the newer generation as well.
Well, I think that, you know, if you really go to that level, and I agree with you 100%, we do not equip, our schools are factory schools. You know, they're teaching you how to work in a factory. They're teaching you how to follow.
They're teaching you how to wake up in the morning, go to a place, stay there for 8 hours, get bare minimum from that place where you're staying, and then go home and just be happy with whatever because everybody's doing it.
Right, and to follow what people are telling you to do, which is kind of what is going on with the rest of the world today, in terms of, you know, this whole scenario we're in with COVID and other things, mental health, dependencies, those types of things are really oftentimes started by the way that we're educating our children and ourselves, for that matter, when we were growing up, to follow the directions, to believe that these sources are there as, you know, protecting you, and to take away your desire to question what's going on. So this is really, you know, such a, it's so deep in our societies. You know, there are people out there that are trying to look for alternative ways to educate children. You know, homeschooling is one of them. I know Jessica is one who homeschools her children, and with homeschooling, depending on, in the United States anyhow, depending, I believe, on the state you're in, there's certain requirements in terms of what they're supposed to be taught and how they're supposed to be taught that and that kind of stuff, which can be limiting it in some states versus others. And I think Jessica actually is you know, actively chose where she lived to be able to fall within different parameters in terms of what can be taught during homeschooling. There's also schools, like I use this model for helping leaders, like we did, you know, to find out what our natural geniuses are. Well, the founder of that, the creator of that model, he's also got a genius school for kids. And what this genius school is really trying to teach children as early as like 13 years old more of an entrepreneurial mindset. Now, I'm not one who says you got to be an entrepreneur. I think that you want to have that entrepreneurial spirit, and in large companies, which, regardless of how some people feel about large companies, if we didn't have them, we wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that happen. But what you want there is you want to have the entrepreneurial spirit in your employees, which is intrapreneurship. Now, that's what we need to be teaching, you know, as an alternative to just following direction, to, in addition to some of the basics like your language, like your math. Those are cores that we do need to understand. But we also need to teach mental health. We need to teach creative mindsets as opposed to follow the book mindsets. We need to do those and encourage those types of things. So that is really where I think that our education systems need to go. I think there are groups like my mentor who created the Genius University and Genius Schools for Kids is all about that. But you're using private money to be able to make that happen. And when you try to go into the public school systems, oftentimes it's very difficult to justify that because there's so many forms and requirements before the schools can actually say, okay, why don't you bring that program in here? Even if it's an after-school program, you know, we could offer you, you know, some funding so that you can bring this in for our kids. And oftentimes the restrictions that are on, because there's also that governmental agency that encompasses your education system, and they limit some of the things that you have there. Here's, you know, Jessica is saying, yes, each state is different. We have a high level of freedom here in Alabama. And I think that, you know, even though Alabama is the state right next to Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken, Jess was saying Tennessee is much more restrictive in what
But how do
the
they
flexibility you
control
have.
that? How do they control? Do when you homeschool there? Do you still write exams and have to send reports and all that, or how does the homeschooling work?
You know, I'm not the best person to ask. Jessica is probably one of the best people and resources that we have in our community to be able to talk about that, because she's been doing it for so long. I've learned mainly from what I've heard from Jessica, but you know, I think that there's certain tests or curriculum that they've got to teach, and then have to have some sort of recorded success rates and things like that.
I see she says here they do not have traditional exams. They do not have traditional exams, etc., in their home. So I'm all for writing the exam, or all for doing the work. But the writing of exams, I actually saw a very good piece, a meme one day. It's a meme, but where they say you can't measure everybody on the same test. I don't know if you heard. It's like asking a fish to climb a tree, and then asking the elephant to do exactly the same, because people are different. So I think with that with that in mind, I personally think that homeschooling kids, or like in community, teaching the kids in a community, if you don't want to homeschool, the things that we need to teach them, like there was a comment here, taxes and kindness and compassion, and that the things that people don't get taught at home.
Exactly. I know that there's programs like Jane was just saying there. When I was in high school, they had a thing called home economics, and home economics wasn't just about trying to figure out how to budget, but it was about how do you balance a checkbook, how do you keep track of what you have available to spend and try not to overspend. It also talked about our decisions and choosing what we buy and not buy, and the interesting aspects of some of those, where oftentimes, this is an example, and it was an interesting teacher that we had teaching this, but she was like, we oftentimes will forego buying a new package of underwear, which costs $10, and yet we'll go out and spend $35 on a steak dinner. And it's like, choices. What is it that drives our choices? And how do we better examine why we choose what we choose? But to recognize, you're going to, and people do this all the time with gas, right? I'm going to go across the street. The gas is a penny cheaper over there. Well, on 10 gallons of gas, you just save 10 cents. And sometimes people will drive 10 miles to save that extra penny or nickel on a gallon of gas, which only amounts to 50 cents.
How much liters is a gallon?
About 3.8 liters to a gallon.
And how much do you pay for a gallon?
Depends on where you're at, but anywhere from $3.50. Well, some states are a little bit cheaper, but $3.50 to $4.50 a gallon.
I just want to work out something here quickly, because we have the same problem with our. I'm going to work on 16 divided by 3. You guys are almost per liter the same as that they charge us per liter on petrol. I have not. I've got a very, very bad habit. I do not check what petrol costs. I just stop and say 300 Rand, and we drive until it's finished. So I'm not too clued up with that, but I think you guys are paying almost the same as we're paying.
Yeah, well, you can see, depending, like Jane is saying, that it's $2.89 in Nebraska, which actually Nebraska is a cheaper state. You've got Sherry saying it's $3.15 there, and Jay Bird has given us the exact to the nth decimal point. How many liters are in a gallon?
3.7, almost 4.
Yeah. So I think that it's just interesting the choices that we make and what we'll do, you know, to save 50 cents when you really come down to it, but you're willing to go out and spend even like $10 on a Big Mac meal now almost. So I saved 50 cents on my gas so that I drove an extra 10 miles for, so I probably burned more than that in gas to go save the couple cents on a liter or on a gallon. But I feel good about it because it seems like I'm doing something to save money. And at the same time, I'm going to go buy that $10 Big Mac meal because I got hungry along the way.
That is very expensive. $10 for a Big Mac meal is very expensive. Maybe
Well,
cook
you know,
your
and
own
maybe it's not quite that expensive, but it's kind of like that same thing where it's like, I'm going to go out and do my daily run. And on the way home, I'm going to stop by and get the donut and coffee.
Exactly, because I almost did run.
Yeah.
If you run every day, you can do that every day. Do you know that?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's like, okay, I'm running so that I can eat my donut and not look like my donut. And
Exactly. That's the reason I'm running. It's not for the body. It's just not to change the body from what I'm eating now. So I'm running, and then once I've worked off the calories, you can still buy, because then
you feel good
balance
about it.
Oh, Ryan's putting food. Yeah. Hi, Ryan. Lamb chop in parsley, palm pesto, oyster mushroom, potato gratin, broccolini, and asparagus over a Big Mac for me. I also don't.
Oh man, that
I don't
sounds
like
amazing.
takeaways. I don't like takeaways. I like cooking for people that eat it.
I'm a lazy person, so I can cook, but oftentimes I don't. So when I come to my girlfriend's house, first of all, she doesn't use a microwave either. So when you heat things up, it's going to be more traditional and probably better for you because you're not nuking it. And she cooks, and it's awesome because I'm like I say, I'm lazy about it, and she feeds me healthier food than I would eat if I was on my own.
Yeah, that's true. But my kids as well, if they have to make their own food, they'll rather starve. It's like, when are you going to cook? I'm hungry. And I'm like, not today. Cook your own food.
Look at Sherry. My brother says it's all about his beer. I remember when I was in college, it was, do I have enough money for beer and food, or just beer? And oftentimes it was just the beer.
But drinking a beer is like eating a loaf of bread. So either way.
Yep. Let's see. Here we go. Jaybird. Some days it's a run. Some days it's a jog. Some days it's just sit a spell. Yeah. Well, in my life, lately it's been sit a spell a lot more than anything else.
Do you not do any exercise?
Nothing consistently right now, but especially when I move to South Dakota, that will change. There's some, just a lot of staircases that they have in the community. I mean, long ones that you can use. And I used to do that when I was back in the Air Force, run the stairs and that kind of stuff. And I may have to do a little bit of pre-work before I do that. But yeah, definitely going to be doing some of that more consistently. Let's see. Jane is saying people need to get with neighbors and start to build neighborhood gardens. People set out to produce for the community and to share. And that's part of the group of people that I'm going to be meeting up with in South Dakota. Is they want to create these, year-round greenhouses and things along those lines, so that you can grow your own food. And then out there, you've also got the natural grass-fed cattle and things like that. So you're working with a different type of meat product. From the beginning, they're not grown in a farm that's just there to fatten up the cows. they're out, eating the natural stuff that they would have, for the most part, if they, were not in a cage. Let's put it that way. They're still behind a fence,
Yes.
but it's a better product to begin with. So definitely things that we can do to help ourselves. Let's see.
Where's our fearless leader this morning? Brandon is still sick. We're sending him love and light. Well, he's not. He says he's feeling better. He's had a rough weekend. But he lost some weight, which is a bonus. So I'm like all for food poisoning if you can lose weight. I mean, 2 days, 40 pounds, best diet ever, baby. We're gonna have Brandon on tomorrow to share some weight loss tips.
Yeah, I'd like to see what Cootie has to say about Brandon's techniques.
It's like, Cootie, try and beat this with your juicing.
So yeah, Brandon is planning on going to the doctor again. Hopefully, he's still down in Texas actually, so he's got to make his way back home. And I know that kind of, he was originally going to stop by Jess's, and then he didn't get an accident, opportunity to do that. So Jess says, she gave him a pass on that. I think that, that was definitely, Brandon was so stoked about stopping by Jess and becoming another one of her kids.
But as me and Bob said on Friday, and it actually just pulled through this whole weekend and everything, is you can make as much plans as you want. If you are not supposed to be somewhere, then it's not going to happen. I mean, I was supposed to go on my trip and things just didn't work out. It's just, that's not where I'm supposed to be. There's other things for me, yeah. And I've just realized that because what transpired this morning, it wouldn't have worked out the way it did if I was gallivanting in the Western Cape. So a lot of those things just it happens. It's sad. I think that he was really looking forward to go and visiting her, and I think having food poisoning or being sick is no fun at all. It's really no fun at all.
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody wants to be sick, so that's absolutely true. On the other hand, we're doing some things in the world today that actually are causing people to be more sick than they might otherwise be. So that's interesting. Yes, Brandon, no share the cooties. Yeah, he ended up getting food poisoning, and it seems to be lingering quite a lot longer than normal food poisoning. So
I hear he said that he had to go for a COVID test as well to see that he doesn't have COVID.
Well, I know that the first results he got back, if I'm not mistaken, were negative. So, that's kind of like when I go in and they check in my ears to see if I have any kind of, blockage in my ear. And then they see out the other side and they're like, yeah, and there's nothing there. You got a negative brain test. Well,
I can see your house through it.
Yeah, exactly. So,
I'm gonna read our
you wanna read the bio on our guest who's behind the scenes here and just about ready to come on?
I'm very excited because let me read this to you. Today on the show, we have, let me just say this correctly. Jack, is it Bobo or Bobo? Bobo?
Jack Bobo, I think.
Jack Bobo is the author of Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices, which explores how to reshape our food environment to make healthy food choices the easy choice. Jack is also the CEO of Futurity, and has delivered more than 500 speeches in 50 countries on the future of food, emerging food trends, and consumer attitudes and behaviors. Jack previously served as the Chief Communication Officer and Senior Vice President for Global Policy and Government Affairs at Intrexon Corporation. Prior to joining Intrexon, Jack worked at the U.S. Department of State for 13 years as a senior advisor for global food policy. An attorney with a scientific background, Jack received from Indiana University JDMS in I don't know what that means. I apologize. In environmental science. BS, what does that stand for?
Bachelor's of Science.
Okay. In biology and a BA in psychology and chemistry.
Yeah, JD is like a law degree.
Geez, very clever.
There's lots of letters that we always get a chance to talk about.
I'm like, what's this and this and this? What does this mean?
I know I got this alphabet soup that can be behind my name, but I don't even know what some of that stuff is about.
Are you going to play us
yes, we'll go ahead and bring Jack right after this introduction of Delight.
Hi, my name is Brandon, and over the past year, the Delight Cafe team and I traveled across the U.S. researching this rapidly growing industry of CBD products. What we have found throughout the industry were products that were inconsistent in dosage and used ingredients that weren't even lab tested. Products with chalky textures, bitter aftertaste, and worst of all, confusion among the CBD consumers. That's why we created Delight Cafe. A 15 milligram, lab-tested, all-natural, water-soluble hemp CBD powder pack. It's odorless, colorless, and tasteless. Add it to your favorite drink of choice, wherever, whenever, on the go. Quickly find your calm, your balance, your delight when you need it most.
Awesome. So we are back, and so glad to have you aboard, Jack. Got a chance to not only read your bio, but I saw your TEDx, I think it was TEDx Tyson talk that you had, and really excited to hear more about the food chain and agriculture and some of the neat things that you were doing when you were over in Africa as well.
Great. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here as well. I've been listening to some of the program and some of what you've already been talking about in terms of how people make choices. I think, fits right in with what I was hoping we could talk about.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit more about yourself and some of the things that you've done and kind of what inspires you or has inspired you to do the things that you do.
Sure. Well, I spent 13 years at the U.S. Department of State working on global food policy. Before that, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Central Africa. And a lot of my interest in figuring out how we can create a more sustainable and nutritious future were shaped by the experiences that I had, both living and working in Africa and then working at the State Department, where I was really traveling around the world, meeting with people in different countries, visiting research facilities, been to South Africa, been pretty much everywhere at one point or another.
Right?
Yeah, it was a wonderful experience. Spent a little time. My wife actually came and joined me for that trip. Went down to Cape Town, and we had a great time. But I just spend a lot of my time thinking about how do we create that sustainable and nutritious future, and one that people are going to enjoy. And I think it fits in with a lot of the themes that you have here on this show, because there are different types of futures that we could have that solve some of the problems. And I'm particularly focused in my book on the problem of obesity. In the United States, 42% of all Americans are obese, 75% are overweight or obese, and other countries around the world are sort of following right behind. So it's not just a US problem, we're just a little bit out ahead. And before I wrote the book, I was just struggling with this question. How is it that at a time when we know more about health and nutrition than we've ever known in the history of the planet, we've never been more obese? And you can go into a grocery store and find more healthy food choices than ever before, and yet we've never been more obese. So it's not an information problem, and it's not for many food access problem, though it is absolutely for some. And yet these problems persist. You know, back in 1960, we knew nothing about health and nutrition. We were cooking with Crisco, you know, like animal fat, and nobody was obese. And yet, so that's really the nature of the book, is not, you know, focusing on individual nutrients. I'm not a dietitian, I'm not an MD, but how has our food environment changed in ways that like drive those bad choices? Because, you know, we don't have less willpower today than we had in the past, but we just have to exert willpower far more often than we ever did. So that's sort of a long introduction, but, you know, the book is trying to figure out how do we get back to a time when we were just enjoying our food and we weren't struggling with it. We weren't counting calories. We weren't hating ourselves for our failures.
Have you found that the agriculture is getting better or worse at the moment?
Well, in terms of agriculture, a lot of people think things are bad and getting worse. You know, if you look at 40% of all the land on earth that could be devoted to agriculture is being devoted to agriculture today. The amount of cropland is the size of South America, the amount of pasture land the size of Africa. 70% of all fresh water goes to agriculture. You know, 10 to 15% of greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture, another 10 to 15% from deforestation, 80% of which is caused by agriculture. So that's together, that's almost a third of all emissions come from agriculture. So when you look at numbers like that, it feels like our food system is broken and agriculture is the problem. On the other hand, if we were farming today the way we were in 1960, without intensive agriculture that everybody hates, well, we would need 1 billion additional hectares of land without those productivity gains. And that's more than a quarter of all of the forest on the planet. There are only 3.6 billion hectares of forest on the planet. And so what it's hard for people to wrap their minds around is that agriculture can be the single biggest driver of deforestation and the single biggest savior of deforestation. And so you've got that challenge at the same time. Without intensification, we would have needed more land. But, you know, you don't see the hectares that weren't cut down. You only see those that are. Yes. And so, you know, it's sometimes hard to understand that, you know, Niels Bohr, the physicist, said, you know, the opposite of a falsehood or the opposite of a truth is a falsehood, but the opposite of a profound truth may very well be another profound truth. Like that, you know, agriculture is the problem, but agriculture is also the solution. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's definitely the good and the bad. There's the things that have been tested in the past that may have turned out to be not as healthy as we might have thought that they were in the past because we didn't have the science behind it to point out some of these things. But at the same time, you know, because of the growth of the world's population, we've had to try to find ways to be able to feed that. And, you know, not being too much of an altruist or whatever, but the growth of the human population is oftentimes dependent on the growth of our food supply. So if we can, you know, if we feed more, then do we create more? And at what point in time do we run into a problem of balance where we have a population that may not be supported by agricultural land without destroying the forest that is needed in order for the earth to breathe? Yeah,
so what's surprising is that in some ways it's just the opposite. You would think the more food you have, the more people you can have, and then population gets out of control. But the countries on the planet with the fastest population growth are those with the least food. And when you think about it, it actually makes sense, because if you don't know if your children are going to survive, then it makes sense to have more children, right? As soon as the childhood mortality drops in a country for one generation, population fertility drops to 2. Nobody really wants to have more than 2 or 3 kids. And so Bangladesh, one of the fastest growing population countries in the world, has a fertility rate that's just about 2. because they brought child mortality down, the problem is they had so many young people that everybody still wants to have a couple kids. So their population is going to grow for 50 years, not because they're having more kids, because everybody's only having 2, but because there's so many young people. And so when we think about population growth, we all talk about going from 7.8 to 9.5 billion people by 2050. 100% of that population growth is because of people living longer. It's not because we're having so many more kids. The global fertility rate is reached almost, the rate at which it replaces replacement rate. And so we're actually not having more kids. We've just got this long, backlog of young people that need to get older and stop having more kids. So more food is the solution. 50 or 60 years ago, about a third of the global population went to bed hungry. Today, it's less than 10%. So we're absolutely moving in the right direction, but not fast enough. That would be the point I would make.
Okay, so how do we as consumers know which foods are safe to consume and which choices we need to make?
Well, I would argue that most of us actually know the answer to those questions. We're just not able to make those choices. I think most of us know we should eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. Most of us know that many of the ultra processed snacks that we're eating are probably not very healthy for us. We know we should be eating more whole foods. So like the vast majority of choices we should make, we already know what the right one is. The question is, why aren't we making that right choice every day? And so I'm going to give you an example related to one of the comments that was made earlier about why is it you'll go across town in order to save 2 cents on your gas? So, if let's say you go to Walmart to buy a clock and the clock you want to buy costs $20. And just as you're ready to check out, the guy says, hey, the Walmart, 5 minutes away has the same clock for only $10. Would you go jump in your car and go and buy the $10 clock? When you pose the question like to students, about 70% will say yes. Sure, save $10, drive 5 minutes, what the heck. But let's say you were buying a big screen TV and it costs $710. And the guy said, hey, if you go 5 minutes, it'll only cost $700. Most of us are not going to get in the car to go save $10 on a $700 TV. We might or might not for the clock, but you save exactly the same amount of money. So it's like in terms of your personal budget, it's the same, but psychologically it's completely different. And it's that need to understand the psychology of our food choices that is what's critical. So it's less about the nutrients, it's less about the actual product than the behaviors. So back in the early 1980s, when the US implemented dietary guidelines and many countries started doing the same, they decided to focus on fat as the villain of the health and nutrition story. And they told people eat less fat. And food companies did really what you would hope they would do. They introduced thousands of low-fat products. So you get low-fat mayonnaise and salad dressing and whatever you wanted. The problem is that consumers looked at that and the brain thought, hey, if one cookie is low-fat and good for me, the whole bag must be even better. I could lose a pound if I ate a pound of cookies, right? And so our psychology actually drove us to overconsume because low fat is not low calories, right? And, in my book, I talk about this. It's called the halo effect, that when a product has one good characteristic, we just assume that it's high in nutrients, it's low in calories, it's good in every other way. And that leads us to overconsume it. And that's one of the problems with these new plant-based burgers, as an example, is that people think, okay, a plant-based burger, it's made out of plants, so it must be good for me. Well, they actually have higher sodium and, it may or may not be a better product. The problem is people are eating it and then they're still eating the regular hamburgers. The number of plant-based burger consumed has gone up, but the amount of, regular hamburgers is exactly the same. So people think they can eat their way out of a health problem instead of finding a way to reshape their environment. And just one last example, most of us have no idea what an adult serving of food looks like. Because if you went back to 1955 and you went to McDonald's for a meal, you would have gotten, what is today a kid's hamburger. You would have gotten a small fry, but you would have gotten a one order of fry. They didn't have a large fry then. And the fry in 1955 is smaller than a small fry today. And you would have gotten a 6 ounce or a 7 ounce soda. So think of that. A kid's meal plus a 7 ounce soda was an adult serving. Most of us don't even imagine that we could eat that. We would eat 2 or 3 of those. And so that's part of the problem, is that we don't even know like what our plate should look like anymore and what should be filling. And so if your brain doesn't think you've eaten enough, it will tell you to keep eating. And so, portion sizes, plates are 40, 50% bigger today than they were in 1960. So all of these signals in our environment are telling us eat more. So it's not that we're not smart. It's not that, we don't have willpower, but we're being nudged in the wrong direction every single minute of every single day.
Well, and then there's also the challenge, if I'm not mistaken, that, some of the foods that we're eating also create chemical interactions in the body that actually generate a hunger factor for more of that particular thing. So, for instance, when you eat sugars, your body becomes kind of attuned to sugar and then desires more sugar. And that sugar can come in many different forms. As long as you're feeding your body something that can be converted into sugar, oftentimes you're going to get these hunger pangs, even though you're not physically needing food. Those pangs are due to biochemical changes that food has created in today's world, where in the older days, where you didn't have as many of the pre-processed foods and things along those lines, you were getting a more balanced food for what the body actually needs.
Yeah, Michael Moss came out with his new book, Addicted, recently, which sort of talks about how addictive sugar can be. And, there are a lot of empty calories in the foods that we're eating. They don't really have any nutrients or, much nutritional value. And I think that's all true. But, if that were the problem, then the more money you have, the more bad food you could buy, and because, money isn't a factor. And yet the wealthier you are, the healthier you are. And so even though you can buy junk, you choose not to buy junk. And so the behavior is being moderated by the environment of wealthier people. And so the environment can overcome, the addictiveness of sugar, the empty calories of these other things. Culture can overcome those factors, but we've lost so much of our food culture in terms of when do you eat, what's the appropriate amount to eat, that we don't have signals that are sort of reminding us, one cookie, you can eat a whole bag, or, instead of a small bag of chips, you end up with a really big bag. And our brain thinks of servings. And so, you may have gone to, a business meeting where like all the sandwiches were cut in half and you grabbed a sandwich to eat, and this is something called unit bias. If the sandwiches are cut in half, you assume half a sandwich is a sandwich. If they're not cut in half, then you assume a full sandwich is a serving. And so, there are things in our environment that nudge us one way or the other. And, if you go to a Subway restaurant, if you were to have two, you buy the foot-long sub, but they were individually wrapped. Well, you could open up one, eat it, and then you've got this completely wrapped sandwich. And you may think, what? I've had enough. I don't need to eat that. But as soon as they put that foot-long together, you feel like you've only eaten half your meal. And so, those are the kinds of things in our environment that, could work for us. We could work with restaurants and say, hey, why don't you individually wrap the two halves of that sandwich? And now I get 2 meals out of it. 2 meals for the price of one is good value. Eating twice as much as you need is not good value.
Okay. So how does bad food choices contribute to mental health?
Well, when we think about food, I think many people agonize about food every day. it is so stressful. And, certainly, some people are perfectly happy with their weight. And, the point is not to stigmatize people, for whatever weight they choose as their ideal weight. But for many people, they're struggling and they're moving from one diet to the next diet to the next diet. And almost everybody blames themselves when a diet doesn't work. They never say it's the diet's fault. And to me, that doesn't make sense, because if you can't follow a diet, and if, what we know is that there's virtually no diet out there that everybody can consistently follow. Some people can follow keto, and some people can follow paleo, and some people can follow, the intermittent fasting. And so it works for some people some of the time. But if it doesn't work for everybody all the time, then it's just not that helpful. And so people, though, blame themselves, not the diet. And so that's part of where it gets into mental health, is that many people just don't enjoy food today the way they did in the past. And it can undermine self-image. It can lead to other eating disorders. We've seen a huge rise in something, orthorexia, which is where people are like worried about the purity of the food that they eat. They're worried about chemicals and substances and toxicity and pesticides and all these things, to the point where they end up with not being able to eat anything because they're just worried all the time. And mostly our food is safer than it ever has been. The pesticides in our food are safer than the old pesticides we used. It makes sense to try to avoid them, but not to worry about it. And I'll just give you a concrete example that every year there's a list of the fruits and vegetables that have the most number of pesticide residues on them. It's called the Dirty Dozen. You may have heard of it. And, they're trying to bring awareness to pesticide residues on food. And that's a reasonable thing to do. But studies have shown that low-income people will actually avoid all fruits and vegetables when exposed to that information, because they're not really sure which ones are good and which ones are bad. They just heard that there are these residues on fruits and vegetables. And so something that's intended to bring awareness to a problem actually discourages those who need healthy food the most from eating it. And that's where, we don't want people to have to stress about these things. We want the government to deliver safe food and companies to deliver safe food, and us to be able to focus on, how to improve health, not how to avoid problems all the time.
Well, one of the things that you've mentioned a couple times has to do with, the level of income or the affluence of the population. Those that may make more may eat healthier. But if you look at it, it seems like from a broader perspective, the United States, being a more affluent country, also has the most obesity. So what has happened in terms of, maybe the more affluent of the affluent country might eat better. And I'm not so sure that that's true. They also drink more too sometimes. But in terms of looking at it from a broader perspective, it seems like, the more affluent countries that have access to more food choices tend to still eat poorly. And in fact, then when you get into the economic status of the different people in the country and our food supply, our food chain, we tend to offer at a cheaper price foods that have less intrinsic nutrition that are also easily gotten off of the food, Doritos,
right,
potato chips, that kind of stuff, which are in essence almost empty calories. But those are the ones that are most accessible to, and oftentimes are the ones that lower income people choose. So
right.
I'm just wondering, just how tightly income really is tied to health and healthy eating from a broader perspective,
Right.
as opposed to a micro perspective.
So one of the challenges in what you just said, is that you're comparing two different groups. And so what is true within a group may or may not be true between groups. Like there's a correlation between nutrition and height. So the healthier, the more you eat, and yet, but genetics also, is almost 100% responsible for our height. And so in the United States, your height is determined by your genetics for most people. If you go to a developing country, your height is almost entirely determined by your nutrition, right? So because, many people don't get the proper nutrition. So, in Japan after World War II, people jumped 5 inches in height in a generation because all of a sudden their nutrition changed. So it's hard to compare between groups. So it's definitely true within a group, the United States, that those who are the wealthiest are the healthiest. But, when you start comparing countries, it becomes harder. But even in the developing world, today, what you see is many people are overweight and many people are underweight in those places. Obesity rates in the Middle East are, 40 or 50%. So it's a problem that's coming along. But the question is sort of, how do we address those issues? And it's complicated because food price, if you raise the food price, you don't necessarily lead people to make healthier decisions. Some people have said, we should tax fast food. Well, many low-income people, they're not going to buy more apples because they can't, buy a Happy Meal. They may buy even less healthy food. Soda, taxes are something that, people often propose. But soda consumption in America is at a 30-year low. So, we get far fewer calories from soda today than we did, 30 years ago. So soda is not really the problem. It's part of the problem. But when you start trying to focus on individual solutions, it just becomes very complicated to do. And that's why, in the book, I'm really talking about a societal approach. How do we reshape the environment so individuals don't have to be making these decisions? So an example in the book is, instead of focusing on a soda tax, which soda drinkers hate and soda makers hate, what if all of those restaurants that give you free refills just gave you a 12-ounce cup as the default cup? So like when you go in and you buy it, they give you, if you ask for a bigger cup, they give you the bigger cup. Well, we know human behavior, and behavior is you go, you fill up your cup, you drink it, maybe you get a half a cup and you leave. It doesn't matter if it's a 21-ounce cup or a 12-ounce cup, your behavior is the same. And so if we can begin to harness those things, if we encouraged all restaurants to use a 9-inch plate as the standard plate, well, overnight, we would reduce the amount of food on the plate by 20%. And, if you don't get the food, you're not going to eat it. If restaurants gave you the option of getting the to-go bag before you eat, so that you could actually, put away half your food before you start eating instead of just whatever's left over at the end. So those are kinds of things that don't really don't depend on the nutritional value of food, on counting calories or other things. They're more likely to work within people's lives.
Well, that's interesting. Like Marie is saying here, mindless eating and eating at the slightest sensation of hungry. In other words, we hate to feel hungry. In other countries, feeling hungry is not necessarily unusual. But here in the US, where food is so abundant in terms of at least being able to put something in your stomach, as soon as you feel that, and oftentimes it's driven by stress.
Yeah.
And as soon as you feel it, it's like, okay, I have access to this food. And oftentimes the food that we have access to and that's easiest to eat is the pre-processed packaged stuff that's out there. So we've kind of created a society to a certain extent where we do live in a high stress environment, maybe more so in the US than even in a lot of other countries. And secondly, we have ready access to foods that are out there that don't require cooking, that are not necessarily the easiest choice, but they have a shelf life that's 6 months long, as opposed to an apple, which has one that's X days long. So I think that's something else that we need to really look at as well.
Well, and I would add boredom on top of that.
Yeah.
Often we think maybe we're hungry, but we're actually just bored and we're kind of wandering through the kitchen because we're looking for something to do. and we think, oh, maybe I'm hungry. And so, stress and boredom are actually big parts of this. And so that's where behavior, like instead of walking into the kitchen when you're bored, what if you walked into the gym? What if you picked up a book? What other things can distract us from either stress or boredom? But, when you're talking about other countries, before 1975, there were, I think, 2 countries on the planet that had obesity rates above 15%. Today, almost every country on the planet has an obesity rate above 15%. So things have changed really dramatically in a remarkably short period of time.
Yeah, we've moved, from a more rural environment that required more physical activity to a more sedient environment of urban environment of working in factories where you're doing something, but you're not necessarily moving that much. You're sitting behind the computer, doing your work as opposed to being out on the floor walking around. So there's a lot of different things that are happening that I think are creating challenges. And you talked about earlier about the food source and the genetics in terms of how tall you are and so forth. But a lot of genetics we have, but the expression of what comes out is dependent on what we eat and the environment that we live in. So we can all be 6 foot tall if you look at some of these countries where there's been literally a growth spurt. And oftentimes that is just because they've gotten a different level of nutrition, which allows the genetics to then express in a different way than they did before.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just understanding how things have changed and trying to work with people, how we treat our kids. Nowadays people are worried to let their kids, out at 8 o'clock in the morning and not worry about them until 9 o'clock at night. We want our kids to be close. We're fine if they're in the house most of the time, And so kids, obesity rates in children, are dramatically higher as well, which is of course a predictor of, health problems later in life. And so again, starting early with these behaviors is critically important.
What tips can you give our viewers to start and make the right choices? Like simple things that's the easiest to do and the smallest change that they can do that can make a difference from today going forward.
Yeah, so I would say, focus on those behavioral things that you can do, and so when you're going to the grocery store, having a list of things you want to buy, grocery stores are like the worst place in the world for these psychological problems because of something called decision fatigue or mental fatigue. Like the more choices you have to make, the worse our choices get. And there's no place worse than a grocery store because we're literally making thousands of decisions about which brand and which product and which fruit and which vegetable. And so it's inevitable if you don't have a list that you're going to begin to add the ice cream and the candy bars and the other stuff at the end just because you're worn out.
That is on the list to begin with.
Yeah. Well, and one thing in the UK, some of the retailers have gotten together and they're actually redesigning the grocery store to encourage more fruit and vegetable purchases. And they've been able to increase by 13% fruit and vegetable purchases just by redesigning the layout. And shoppers have no idea. They're just buying more fruits and vegetables. And so, if you get the candy out of the checkout aisle, most people won't buy the candy, right? So there are little things that we can do. And so, some places have an aisle that doesn't have the candy if you're going through with your kids. But think about your food environment, have those lists when you go to the grocery store. Think about the smaller plates, at home to condition yourself to the idea that a 9-inch plate, which most of us think of as a salad plate, but was a normal size plate in 1960, is normal. When you go to restaurants, my wife and my 2 kids, when we would go, we would only ever order 3 meals. And if we were hungry, we ate dessert and we didn't have to feel bad about it because, we had the right amount of food. And almost every time we went out, we took food home, even though we only ordered 3 servings. So again, thinking about what works within a person's own lifestyle and you can still get the dessert because you deserve it, because you haven't had as much food, so you don't need to feel bad about it. Think about those little things you can do. If you don't buy the snacks, you will not eat the snacks. If you buy the snacks, leave them in the cupboard, not on the countertop, because if you pass by something 5 or 6 times, inevitably at some point, we give in and we eat a cookie. But if you don't see them, you don't have to rely on willpower. So those little nudges in our behavior, just think about water, as opposed to other drinks. We don't have to have bottled water all the time. The most tap water is perfectly fine in most places. And so, there are things that we can do that just make it a little bit easier for us. And so look for those in your environment.
Is there I saw on your video, you said something about the chemicals that we put in our bodies, and that we are made of the same chemicals, and we must just check that we choose the less evil of the chemicals. Is that what you're saying with making choices on food?
Well,
and stuff?
yeah, I mean, a lot of people today are worried about chemicals in their food. And, I've often heard people say, if you can't pronounce the ingredient, you shouldn't eat it. But if you were to look at the ingredients in an apple, like all of the nutrients and other things, you wouldn't be able to pronounce any of those things either, because all food is made of chemicals. And so this idea that you should be choosing between good and bad chemicals doesn't really make any sense. We're all made of chemicals. All food is made of chemicals. So stop worrying about chemicals. If you're eating an apple versus a processed product, the apple will win every time. If you're choosing between Doritos and baby carrots, I think we all know which is the right snacking choice for us. It's if kids never get chips, they will never ask for chips. My kids probably didn't have a soda until they were 12 or 13 years old, because we just didn't have sodas in the house. I don't really crave them. So it's not as if they were special or good. And even today, they just, my son might drink a soda a week and my daughter never drinks soda. So, trying giving people good habits is the way to go, and starting them young is by far the best. Now, this is harder when you're low income, because, you can't afford for your kids to not eat food. So we need to recognize, of course, that, there are real food deserts out there where it's hard to get access to food. So we need to do lots of things to make life easier for people, but our kids are watching us too. And, many people will say, if you eat your green beans, then you can have ice cream. Well, what you're telling your kid is green beans are bad, and I must reward you in order for eating it. So instead of seeing us say, hey, if you're not going to eat those green beans, I'm going to eat those because that's the best thing there. Or you always eat your vegetables first, and your kids see that behavior that, that's the best thing on the plate, not the worst. And so again, we can, our kids are watching us even when, we don't think they are.
That is the truth, because my kids love vegetables. I've never had a problem with my kids eating vegetables. If you put vegetables and sweets in front of them, they'll rather eat the vegetables because they know they're going to get the sweets in any case. But vegetables and fruit are always their first choice.
Yeah. And that's because they learn that behavior, though. I mean, I always tell people, you should always have 2 kids, because if you have one, you think you're either a good parent or a bad parent. But once you have 2, you realize the kids are going to be, who they are. So there are some things you have control over, but many things, we don't.
Got a question. Having been in the governmental sector as long as you were in the food and so forth, it appears that, even like when we're talking about soda consumption, well, soda consumption may have gone down, but there's been other beverages created that are probably not considered sodas, but are packed full of sugars or packed full of caffeine that have now replaced it, including coffee. I mean, right. The coffee you get at Starbucks and the Frappuccino and stuff, you have as much sugar or more sugar in those than you do in a Coca-Cola. Right. So they're not, we may have reduced our soda consumption, but we've just replaced it with other crap that's really been just defined differently by the governmental agencies. So how much of what we're really seeing in the world today may be due to the definition of what falls in this category versus that category, as opposed to any real progress that have been made in our eating decisions?
Yeah, well, I don't think that the reduction in soda has anything to do with progress. It just has to do with consumer choices. So completely agree with you. But, you think about milk. Milk consumption in the United States is at a 50-year low, and, we often talk about like plant-based dairy and other things like stealing market share, almond milk and soy milk. But the number one thing that's actually dug into purchases of fluid milk is water. People just buy more bottled water today than they did in the past. And so it is sometimes hard to understand what's replacing what. But I completely agree with you that energy drinks, functional drinks, coffee and teas that, have sugar, all of those things are contributing. And my point about the taxes was that soda taxes focus really on soda, and they may not capture that broader range of products. So I think we're on exactly the same page. But, a lot of it has to do with behavior. I mean, you've both probably been on airplanes where they gave you the little 7-ounce soda and you drank it. And, did you ever finish it and think, could I have 6 more of those, please? Right. I think most of us, we finish it, we think, my God, that tasted so much better than the regular soda I have. And the reason is that you stop drinking it at its maximum tastiness, like you've enjoyed it the most. If you kept drinking, you would actually enjoy that experience less. And so, that's where you can begin to take advantage of, the sizing. A brownie at Starbucks is 4 times larger than the maximum bliss point for eating that brownie. You're struggling at the end to finish it instead of enjoying it. But people expect it to be large. And so Starbucks doesn't want to give away food you're not going to like, but consumer expectation drives restaurant behavior. Food is not the most expensive part of running a restaurant. It's labor and real estate. And so they give you food you're not going to eat, and it makes you fat because you won't come to their restaurant if you don't. So, if we could work with them, then maybe they could right size the portions and you would choose restaurants that, were giving you the right size food. And that's behavior. That's not tastiness or any of these other things that we often focus on.
Yeah, that's the law of diminishing returns in the food product. There's no doubt that first bite of something tends to be the most satisfying. And as you continue to eat more and more, it gets to be like, well, I got another bite left on my plate, so I might as well just eat it, as opposed to throwing it away because there's starving people somewhere else that don't get a chance to eat. And I know that was one of the things that I grew up with was, eat everything that's on your plate. So the larger the portions that I choose to put on my plate or that are given to me on the plate dictate oftentimes how I think about it, because it's like I need to eat everything that's on my plate. And if I don't, then I'm feeling like, I'm breaking the code that was instilled in me as a kid. My brother, on the other hand, he didn't eat everything when he was a kid, and he still doesn't eat everything. So he's got a 6-pack, I got a keg, it's one of those things. And like you said about parents, same parents, same general situation, but the children perceive things differently.
They can, but the parents definitely have a big impact. But we need to recognize personal differences. Yeah.
In the bio, there's this word. Let me just find it. What is futurity? Is it futurity? Did I pronounce it right?
You did. So futurity. It sounds like a made-up word, but it is not. It does. And so it's just the name of my company. And so I describe myself as a food futurist because I'm always thinking about what could the future of food look like, and how do we figure out what that future should be, and then how do we get there?
Okay, and how do we? What does the future of food look like?
Well, I think, diversity of choice is definitely going to be part of it. But I personally think that in the future, we're going to spend a lot more time thinking about our food environment. And it's more than just, where we eat and what we do, but, it's about community as well. How do we reshape our landscapes so that, they do encourage us to walk up the stairs instead of take the elevator, to have walking paths and sidewalks. So, it's not just about the food we eat, but it's about a sense of community that when people feel more comfortable, when they have people to talk to, so we need to have a broader conception of what our food environment really means and build cities with that in mind. There are cities that have begun to redesign themselves to solve some of these problems with great success. And, so just a bigger conception of what healthy eating means.
Sorry, Brett, did you want to ask something? Okay,
no, go ahead.
Okay. With the COVID and everybody moving into self-sustainability and moving off the grid and everything, do you think that will have a huge impact on where we are at the moment?
Well, I think that, it's hard to see it as a long-term trend. I think people thinking of self-sufficiency and maybe having backyard, chicken coops and other things, bringing people closer to their food and how their food is produced, I think is a good thing because so many people are so far removed. But it is hard to imagine as a solution to some of these problems because things have to scale and everybody can't move off the grid. And so I think it gives us hints at solutions, but it's not the solution because things have to scale in order to have impact.
Right. Well, one of the things that I was wondering, and it kind of ties to scale, but it's scale in the food industry, in the interaction of the food industry with the government is as there's a concentration, and there has been over the past years of producers of food, what kind of an influence do they really have on what the government agencies are promoting or saying is good or not good? For instance, GMOs and hormonal driven growth in animals and even plants. Oftentimes those start out with maybe good intent, but there hasn't been really the science behind it yet to show that there may be detrimental effects. But because of big industry, they actually get a chance to remove or address that with the government, and then the government supports it until proven guilty, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. And, I was very involved in policy around biotechnology and other things. So, I spent a lot of my time talking to other countries about these issues. There are different ways of answering the question. When it comes to something like, genetically modified products, you're changing one gene in 30,000 genes. And when you do normal breeding of crops, you're introducing new genes that might have been in a wild type, but now through crossing it, you bring it into the food supply. Well, how do you know that when you're crossing those wild types of, whether it's wheat or other things, that you're not bringing in something that could be harmful? And the answer is you don't. And it's impossible to do any testing. So the reason we test GMOs is because we can. We actually know what the protein they produce is, so why wouldn't you test it? But the things we test for are allergenicity and toxicity. And the reason we test for those is because traditional varieties that have been crossbred have accidentally introduced allergens and have accidentally introduced toxins. So, normal breeding produces exactly the same risks as these new crops. It's just we're actually able to test them, so we do. The question of whether or not they're good or bad, I look at things less about good and bad and right and wrong and more about choices and consequences. That if we use hormones in order to improve, milk production, or we use antibiotics in feed in order to add more weight to cattle, that's the consequence is more production and cheaper prices. And that might be good or bad, that having more production is part of the reason that, less than 10% of the global population is hungry today. But it's not always a good thing to overproduce. There are animal welfare implications of cows producing 40% more milk today than they did in the past. And those are just trade-offs. And as society, we have to decide what we want. And so I often talk about sort of the difference between organic production and sort of this intensive agriculture that you're referring to. And consumers really understand organic because it's what I call local sustainability. It may use less water, less fertilizer, less insecticides and pesticides, and that feels like a better type of agriculture. The problem is that organic generally produces 20 to 30% less food on a farm. So you have a lighter environmental footprint on that piece of land, but you need more pieces of land. So that the problems of organic are global because they're spreading the problem someplace else. Intensive agriculture, you aggregate the problems, more fertilizer, more pesticides, more nutrient runoff on that piece of land, but we didn't have to cut down any forest someplace else. So I look at it as that's global sustainability versus local sustainability, and there will always be trade-offs between the two. Like many people think of the US as being like much more focused on intensive agriculture and Europe as being much more focused on small, local, artisanal farming. But Europe imports 70% of its animal feed in order to feed its population. And the country that sends the most food to Europe is Brazil. So Europe has exported its environmental footprint to the most biodiverse country on the planet. And so that's a choice and a consequence. If Europe doesn't produce its own food, somebody else will. And so Europe doesn't use GMOs and all of these other things mostly, though they import food using them. So there's no public health concern in Europe about those products from a regulatory standpoint. It's really just a consumer issue. But they're exporting a footprint. The US imports the global footprint for agriculture because we export food. And now both Europe and the US export $150 billion worth of food products, but the US is exporting corn, soy, wheat, canola, and Europe is exporting beer, wine, whiskey, and cheese. Now, I like my beer, wine, whiskey, and cheese. Anybody who knows me knows that's true, but it's not going to feed the world. And so, so it's a complex question. It's not just about good or bad or right or wrong, but we need to think through the implications of not doing those things too, in a world in which we need 60 to 100% more food by 2050, which is only 30 years away.
And 30 years goes past very, very quickly.
It does. I mean, that's 1990, that's not that far. Well.
I see your book is on Amazon. Is that where the guys can get it? Can they follow you on Facebook as well? I'm not sure if you've got a Facebook page.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I'm probably more on Twitter and Instagram, and LinkedIn are great places to find me. Somebody should feel free to reach out to me if they have questions. If they want to challenge anything I've said, I love to hear from people.
You like fighting with people?
No, I absolutely not. I like finding common ground with people.
Thank you, Sab. We've got this thing. After every episode, everybody gets a chance to give some enlightenment and a message to our viewers, and just give your opinion or whatever you have to say. So I'll go first, and then Brett goes, and then you can go, and then we just want to thank you so much for giving us information and helping us so that we can make better choices in our food when we buy food and everything. And if you guys can go buy the book on Amazon, I think Jack will appreciate that so much, and I think it will help us a lot. So
were you going to start and say something? Or
yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going first. Okay, I'll go. My turn. How do you do this now? Why is it? No, not you. There we go. Sorry, I'm still learning the backstage. Hi guys, thank you for joining us today. And talking about healthy choices in food and everything. It's full moon today. It's Mental Health Monday. It's been hectic. I actually did a card pool. I've got empowerment cards that just give empowerment. There's no specific anything that it's connected to. It just gives empowerment. And this card that I got today actually says, be conscious of the comeback. And it reads on the back, it says, know that everything you do comes back to you. Step outside and consider the consequences before you make a move. If your action will bring peace to yourself and others, it is the right thing to do. So I hope you guys have a wonderful Monday and God bless.
Okay, so other than looking like Casper the Friendly Ghost all day today, yeah, I'd like to just kind of bring up and go along with what we've been talking about. And, you know, choices are ours to make. Although we oftentimes think that we have no choice, that is a choice in and of itself. So when we're out in choosing food, or choosing what to spend our money on, or choosing what we're going to put in our mouth, consciously recognize that we do have that choice. We also have that choice to kind of focus on something else. So maybe that hunger pain goes away because now we got more interested in something else that took our mind off of what we felt our stomach was telling us. And you know, you can go another 8 hours because you're so in flow with something else that's focused your consciousness on something other than eating. So recognize that we do have plenty of choices. Try to make the best possible choice based on information that you can get. Don't always follow. In fact, I would highly recommend never just following what is presented on TV or through mass media or anything like that, but actually do some research yourself. Take that opportunity to grow as an individual, and it will enable you to make healthier choices about all aspects of your life in a much easier and profound way.
Great points. And let me just add on to that, absolutely, you know, we have the power to make positive choices in our lives, but if we can choose, make choices that lead to habits, those habits can become ingrained. And at that point, we don't have to think about them as much anymore. It doesn't have to be as stressful or as difficult. And so if we can create good habits, then they can begin to work for us every day to deliver better outcomes. And so I would encourage people to look around, you know, their homes or look at their environment and see what changes can they make today that would be implemented for longer term. And that could be how they shop. It could be how they produce, put the food on the table, whether it's prepping food on the weekend for the rest of the week, incorporating frozen foods, vegetables into their diet to make it easier to have diversity of choice, to having smaller plates and portions. Just look at the little things that you can do today that tomorrow will become habits that will then become ways of shaping your food choices in a positive way every day. And the last point would just be, you know, don't stress so much about the food you eat. If a diet's not working, it's the diet's fault. It's not your fault. And think about, you know, what can you do? Who can you surround yourself with that's going to help make it easier for you to do the things that you want to do, instead of those who, you know, might encourage you to splurge or do something that you don't want, because good habits are contagious. And if you have good habits, you're going to spread those to those around you. And so think not just about the impact of your choices on yourself, but the impact of those choices on everybody else.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jack. We really appreciate you being on our show. We encourage everybody to go out and actually, you know, buy Jack's book. It's out there on Amazon. Get a chance to read a little bit more about what Jack has been talking about and his, you know, understanding of the industry from both a governmental and a user perspective, and you know, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. So all of those aspects help to make us more equipped to make a better choice. in what we do and choose in life, as well as in what we choose to put in our stomach. So thank you very much, Jack. Really appreciate it. If you want to stick around for a couple minutes after the quick outro here, then we can talk a little bit in the background, but really do appreciate you being here. Anything else, Ilse?
I'm good. I just want to say enjoy the full moon. Buckle up. Things are about to get real.
All right, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye, guys.